happiness is to you. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come that new.
Goodness me, you two, I can't leave you alone for a minute, can I? What are you doing? I don't know. I think those sunglasses must have made them a bit crazy. Right, so today we have on our Paddington ears, we have Frank and we have Paddington, both looking really cool today. Today we're going to continue with our Paddington story. Now, do you remember that Paddington had come all the way from darkest Peru and he'd been lucky enough to meet the Browns? They'd taken him home, and do you remember he got into rather hot water, didn't he, when he had that bath? Well, let's see what happens next with Paddington. Need my reading glasses for this story. Well, I hope it doesn't happen again, you two. Goodness me. Right, here we are. I'll get my glasses on. Paddington. Let's see what happens. So this chapter's called Paddington Goes Underground. Paddington was very surprised when he woke up the next morning and found himself in bed. He decided that it was a nice feeling as he stretched himself out and pulled the sheets around his head with his paw. He reached out and even found a cool spot for his toes. One advantage of being a very small bear in a large bed was that there was so much room. After a few minutes, he poked his head out and sniffed. Ooh, there was a lovely smell of something coming under the door. It seemed to be getting nearer and nearer. I wonder what it could be. There were footsteps coming too, right up the stairs. As they stopped by his door, there was a knock, and Mrs. Bird's voice called out, "Are you awake, young Paddington?" Only just, called out Paddington, rubbing his eyes. The door opened. "Oh, you've had a good sleep," said Mrs. Bird, as she placed a tray on the bed and drew the curtains. "And you're a very privileged person to have breakfast in bed on a weekday." Paddington eyed the tray hungrily. There was half a grapefruit in a bowl, a plate of bacon, an egg, some toast, and a whole pot of marmalade, not to mention a really big cup of tea. "Is that all for me?" he said. "Well, if you don't want it, I can soon take it away again," said Mrs. Bird. But I do, said Paddington hurriedly. "It's just that I've never seen so much breakfast before." "Well, you'd better hurry up with it," said Mrs. Bird. Well, I don't think Mrs. Bird's a woman to be messed about with, is she? She turned in the doorway and looked back. "Because you are going on a shopping expedition this morning with Mrs. Brown and Judy. And all I can say is, thank goodness I'm not going to." And she closed the door. Now, I wonder what she means by that, said Paddington. But he didn't worry about it for very long. There was far too much to do. It was the first time that he'd ever had breakfast in bed, and soon he found it wasn't quite as easy as it looked. Actually, I quite like breakfast in bed sometimes. It's nice, isn't it? Not every day, though. First of all, he had trouble with the grapefruit. Every time he pressed it with his spoon, a long stream of juice shot up and hit him in the eye, which was very painful. And all the time he was worried because the bacon and eggs were getting cold. And then there was the question of the marmalade. He had to leave room for that marmalade. In the end, he decided that it would be so much nicer if he just mixed everything up on one plate and sat on the tray to eat it. "Oh, Paddington," said Judy, when she entered the room a few minutes later and found him perched on the tray. "Whatever are you doing now? Do hurry up, we're waiting for you downstairs." Paddington looked up, an expression of bliss on his face. Well, that part of his face which could be seen behind egg whiskers and toast crumbs. He tried to say something, but all he could manage was a muffled grunting noise, which sounded like, "I'm just coming," all rolled into one. I think he's got his mouth full of marmalade, hasn't he? And toast and tea. "Really?" Judy took out her handkerchief and wiped his face. "You're the stickiest bear imaginable, and if you don't hurry up, all the nice things will be gone. Mum's going to buy you a complete new outfit from Barkridge's. I heard her say so. Now, comb your fur quickly and get downstairs." As she closed the door, Paddington looked at the remains of his breakfast. Most of it was gone, but do you know what? There was still a large piece of bacon left, which it seemed a pity to waste. He decided to put it into his suitcase just in case he got hungry later. Good idea, Paddington, I'm with you there. He hurried into the bathroom and rubbed his face over with some warm water. Then he combed his whiskers very carefully, and a few moments later, not looking perhaps as clean as he had done the evening before, but nevertheless quite smart, he arrived downstairs. I hope you're not wearing that hat," Mrs. Brown said. "Oh, do let him, ma'am," cried Judy. "It's just so unusual." "Oh, it's unusual, all right," said Mrs. Brown. "I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like it. It's such a funny shape. I don't know what you'd call it." "It's a bush hat," said Paddington proudly. "And do you know what? It saved my life." "Saved your life?" repeated Mrs. Brown. "Now don't be silly. How could a hat save your life?" Paddington was about to tell her of his adventure in the bath the evening before, when he received a nudge from Judy. She shook her head. It's a long story," he said. "Then you'd better save it for another time," said Mrs. Brown. "Now come along, both of you." Paddington picked up his suitcase and followed Mrs. Brown and Judy to the front door. By the door, Mrs. Brown paused and sniffed. "That's very strange," she said. "There seems to be a smell of bacon everywhere this morning. Can you smell it, Paddington?" Paddington started. He put the suitcase very guiltily behind himself and sniffed. He had several expressions which he kept for emergencies. There was his thoughtful expression, when he stared into space and rested his chin on a paw, and then there was his innocent one, which wasn't really an expression at all. He decided it would be best if he used this one. Yes, it is very wrong, he said truthfully, for he was a truthful bear. And then he added, perhaps not quite so truthfully, well, I wonder where it's coming from. If I were you, whispered Judy as they walked along the road towards the tube station, I should be more careful in future when you pack your suitcase. Paddington looked down. A large piece of bacon stuck out of the side of his case and was trailing on the pavement. Shoo! Cried Mrs. Brown as a grubby-looking dog came bounding across the road. Paddington waved his suitcase. Go away, dog! He said sternly. The dog licked its lips. And Paddington glanced anxiously over his shoulder as he hurried on, keeping a close eye behind Mrs. Brown and Judy. Oh, dear, said Mrs. Brown. I do have a funny feeling about today, as if things are going to happen. Do you ever have that feeling, Paddington? Paddington considered for a moment. Sometimes, he said vaguely, as they entered the station. At first, Paddington was a little bit disappointed in the underground. He liked the noise and the bustle and the smell of warm air, but he didn't think much of the ticket. He examined carefully the piece of green cardboard which he held in his paw. That doesn't seem much for 80p, he said. After all the lovely whirring and clanking noises the ticket machine had made, it did seem disappointing. He'd expected much, much more for his money. But Paddington, Mrs. Brown sighed, you only have a ticket so that you can ride on the train. They won't let you on otherwise. She looked and sounded rather flustered. Secretly, she was beginning to wish they had waited until later in the day, because it was really quite crowded. There was also the peculiar business of the dogs. Not one, but 6 dogs of various shapes and sizes had followed them right inside. She had a funny feeling that it had something to do with Paddington. But the only time he caught his eye, it had such an innocent expression. She felt quite upset with herself for having such thoughts. Frank, do you think it could have something to do with the bacon? Yeah, I think you're right. I suppose, she said to Paddington as they stepped on the escalator, we ought really to carry you. It says you're supposed to carry dogs, but it doesn't say anything about bears. Paddington didn't answer. He was following behind in a dream. Being a very short bear, he couldn't easily see over the side, but when he did, his eyes nearly popped out with excitement. There were people everywhere. He'd never seen so many. There were people rushing down one side, and then there were people rushing back up the other. Everyone seemed in a terrible hurry. As he stepped off the escalator, he found himself carried away between a man and an umbrella and a lady with a large shopping bag. By the time he managed to push his way free, both Mrs. Brown and Judy had completely disappeared. It was then that he saw the most surprising notice. He blinked at it several times to make sure, but each time he opened his eyes, it said the same thing. Follow the amber light to Paddington. Paddington decided that the underground was quite the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. He turned down and trotted down the corridor, following the amber lights, until he met another crowd of people who were queuing up for the up escalator. Said the man at the top as he examined Paddington's ticket. What's all this? You haven't been anywhere yet. I know, said Paddington unhappily. I think I must have made a mistake at the bottom. The man sniffed suspiciously and called across to the inspector. Here, there's a young bear here smelling a bacon. He says he's made a mistake at the bottom. The inspector put his thumbs under his waistcoat. Well, escalators is for the benefit and convenience of passengers, he said. Not for the likes of young bears to play on, especially in the rush hour. Yes, sir, said Paddington, raising his hat. But we don't have escalators, said the inspector helpfully. Yes, in darkest Peru. I'd never seen one before, so it's rather difficult. Darkest Peru? Said the inspector, looking most impressed. Oh, well, in that case. He lifted up the chain which divided the up and down escalators. You better get back down, but don't let me see you up to any more tricks again. Thank you very much, said Paddington gratefully as he ducked under the chain. It's very kind of you, I'm sure. He turned to wave goodbye, but before he could raise his hat, he found himself being whisked into the depths of the underground again. Halfway down, he was gazing with interest at the brightly coloured posters on the wall, when the man standing behind him poked him with his umbrella. There's somebody calling you, he said. Paddington looked around and was just in time to see Mrs. Brown and Judy pass by on their way up. They waved frantically at him, and Mrs. Brown called out, "Stop!" several times. Paddington turned and tried to run up the escalator, but it was going very fast, and with his short legs it was as much as he could do even to stand still. He had his head down and he didn't notice a fat man with a briefcase who was running in the opposite direction until it was too late. Oh no. Right, I'm going to stop that story there and we're going to continue that chapter another time. We've just got to an exciting point, haven't we? I wonder what's going to happen with the man with the briefcase. Oh, I do like Paddington. He's such a well-meaning bear, isn't he? I like his innocent look as well. Right. We have a special thought of the day from Paddington here. I'm going to show it to the camera because he's so kind, isn't he? Let's see what his thought of the day is. Bring it over to you. There we go. Here it is. There's nothing like a nice chat over a bun and a cup of cocoa. That's true as well, isn't it? If you're feeling a bit sad or a little bit down, then yeah, it's lovely to have a little chat, isn't it? And there's nothing like a drink of hot chocolate to make you feel better. So that's Paddington's thought of the day. Oh, there we go. Right, so it's a bye-bye from Paddington, and Frank, let's rescue you. And it's a bye-bye from Frank. And remember, until our next story, stay safe, be kind, and look after the adults. Okay, see you later. Bye. Bye.